Welcome back. I'm back here with an incredible panel. We've got Paul Ellis, we've got JC from Quranic Endgame, and of course Odon LaFontaine from The Great Secret of Islam. We're waiting for Usama to join us. We're hoping he can. He is traveling, but he has said he will try his best to join us. And we're talking about the Mecca myth, of course, the Jerusalem thesis, something that Odon and Paul have specialized in, because it would seem the Quran is using the idea of Jerusalem, but transplanting it in Mecca. And of course, Mecca, under no circumstances, fits the geographical criteria, the description of, well, Mecca. It fits Jerusalem a lot better, as well as maybe some other places. So yeah, we're here to discuss it today. So welcome back to the panel. Thank you very much. So Paul, say hello, please,
Hi.
and thank you for joining us.
Oh, great pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me again. Rather enjoying this way of spending my my Wednesday evenings. So yeah.
What have you learned anything new from what we're discussing here? Is this already part and parcel of what you have already researched yourself? Because I mean, at some point, we'd love to have you come on and talk about your book, and all of us can then learn from you as you go through the little excerpts from your book.
Oh, it's fascinating the discussions that we've had so far. Odin is presenting it very, very thoroughly. He's going through it with an absolutely fine tooth comb, and there's little if anything to disagree with him about. Completely demolishing the traditional story. And of course, if you demolish the traditional story, then that begs a question: well, what was the real story? What does the Quran really talk about? And yeah, we're moving into this territory, and it's fascinating. Look forward to contributing.
Thank you. I think we can establish that the Quranic narrative cannot be true, not as written. So yeah, JC, welcome. Thanks for joining us.
Hi all. Glad to be here. This series is really fascinating because we know that Islam copied from so many places, but certainly there was a lot of Jerusalem. So most of us, we are somewhat familiar with the thesis, but it really helps to have a deep dive exploration into every single aspect, all grouped into different topics. So this is a very, very good series.
Great. Yeah. And then, of course, our guest of honor, Odon. Thanks. And we're looking very forward to what we're discussing today.
Hello, Lloyd. Hello, everyone. Thanks, Lloyd, for having me and supporting me again.
Of course.
Again. We're not done with Mecca and Jerusalem, but this is, I think, the fifth installment in our series. And we already showed evidence, blatant evidence that cannot be contradicted, that it cannot have happened in Mecca. And I think the most compelling evidence is the question of water. There is not enough water in Mecca, so everything that is described in the Islamic narrative as taking place in Mecca cannot have taken place here. Either it has been an invention, a complete invention, or it has been a displacement of events that happened elsewhere. Where?
Or in a different time as well.
Or in a different time. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, or a combination of some of those. One question, though, for you guys. Academics obviously seem to know this, but yet they don't seem to want to really make an issue of the discrepancies. It's clear the Quranic narrative cannot be true as written. And yet we have negligent academia. I know we've discussed this often, Odon. I mean, Paul, I'd love to know your thoughts on that. Why is academia so negligent when they seem to obviously know that the Quranic narrative does not in any way add up?
Well, it's fascinating. I've been to 3 professional academic conferences. I went to one about getting on for 10 years ago that was held in London, called something like the Quran and the Bible, or the Quran and the biblical context, or something of that sort. And the year before last, ICSA, that's the International Quran Studies Association, had their annual conference in London, so I was able to go to that. And then last year, I went to a conference specifically on called the Seven Long Ones that was hosted by Nikolai Sinai in Oxford. And it was 2 days of listening to presentations on particularly the 7 long surahs. That's 2 to 9, excluding 8. And the it's I don't think that they're dishonest. One view that you sometimes hear is that the professional academics, they know full well what the truth is, but they're not allowed to say it. That they're worried for their funding, they're worried for their safety, and so they all know what the truth is, but they're not prepared to say it, and they're kind of very tentatively, going as far as they dare into the minefield, but ultra cautiously and making sure that they never actually make any real progress. That's not my impression from them. My overwhelming impression is that they are fantastically hardworking, well-informed, studious, and they zone in on particular aspects of the Quran. So Nikolai Sinai, for example, is very good on the structure of the Quran. Gabriel Said Reynolds has made something of a specialism for himself on looking at the biblical allusions. There are other people with other particular angles. And one thing that they all come away with is that they found something that's very, very interesting, and it doesn't quite fit the standard narrative, and they don't understand how this is, and so more work is needed to try and thrash it out. And so they all, I wonder if a part of the situation is that they are all so focused on their individual areas that they are very reluctant to look at the broad picture. And so everyone finds that what they find doesn't fit in to the standard narrative, but they don't look out and try and find a new narrative. That's something that they don't seem to be interested in.
Perhaps a little convenient. And
well, I wonder also if there is an academic caution there. Some people have presented grand narratives and it hasn't worked, and they have been rather disparaged. An example, not necessarily professional academics, but I don't think that the gentleman's name, Luxembourg, with the Syriac, the idea that it was a translation of a Syriac, I don't think that has worn very well in the academic world. I'm rather skeptical of that myself. You've got Dan Gibson with the Petra thesis. I'm not sure many people, I think there's still some merit in that, but I don't think many people in the wider academia think that it could possibly have been the way that Dan Gibson describes it. Stephen Shoemaker, I think, is now heading in that direction, where for his theory to work, he had to disregard the radiocarbon dating of the manuscripts, and that was seen, I think, as being trying to cut the evidence to fit his case rather than actually following the evidence. So I think once you see other people proposing grand narratives and then the narratives not being convincing, I think there's a tendency on what you might call the professional academics to go very cautiously and just focus on the bit that they know. That's my sense.
Odon, do you think we're making an impact as lay people, as YouTubers? Do you think we're actually having an impact in these apologetic circles and in the wider community?
I think we do. Because I have the experience of the situation in France. It's been more than 10 years since I am doing this in French for the French-speaking audience. And this way I was able to reach to the general public. And this is very, very, very important in order for the public to finally understand what Islam is about, and that Islam is mostly a fraud and a forgery. Most people used to think that Islam was something noble, a bit mysterious, the mysterious East, and whereas actually it's a very crude religion. You know what I'm talking about, Lloyd, with awful commandments in the Sharia law. But the thing is, it's supposed to be legit because there was a prophet, or at least someone who pretended to be a prophet, and so on. And especially in France, with our secularism or laïcité, we are not supposed to question the beliefs of others. It's a sort of black box.
Whereas but I think we can question historical claims. I think we can question archaeological claims. And I think that is
we have something that is factual, like the question of water in Mecca. It is factual. It is proof. It is evidence that nothing could have happened in Mecca. So it is evidence that the narrative, the Islamic narrative, is a forgery.
Yeah, JC, anything you want to add before I just show one thing and then we'll jump into our talk today?
Yes, something briefly, but before that comment, I wanted to let you know, I did try to send messages on the chat a bit earlier and they didn't go through, and now the last one has gone through. So I think it's possible that people are trying to send messages and they're not going through, because normally you have more people commenting. So just in case you need to check at your end.
YouTube, as you know, I've also been mass reported. As you know, we've had issues. I want to show, someone said earlier here, what rubbish lies, prove what you're saying, or bring facts and show us if you are educated or are all you clowns. So that's fascinating, but I'd like to show something. We did bring a great deal of facts. We will do so again shortly, but I'd like to show this. This is Muhammad's biography. Now, apparently, we are supposed to believe this because this is the earliest and the oldest and the most respected biography of Muhammad. And of course, Islam is the only religion in which you claim that reports about Muhammad and Muhammad's miracles and life and his companions are all false or unreliable to prove the religion true and to defend it, which is backwards and upside down. But Muslims do lie to each other, and they lie about history, as we're saying, and they cannot prove their myths and claims, as we have discussed on this channel at length. So, for instance, Muslims claim in this biography of Muhammad that Jesus was alive in Syria at the time of Muhammad. And one of Muhammad's companions met Jesus in Syria while Jesus was healing the sick in some woods. And it says here, we got on the authority of a trustworthy informant that Marwan said that he told Salman the Persian that he told the apostle that his master in Amuriya told him to go to a place in Syria. There was a man who lived between two thickets, and every year he would go from one thicket to the other. And the sick used to stand in his way, and everyone he prayed for was healed. And the people came to him with their sick, and he prayed for them, and they were healed. And then he asked who I was, and he turned to me, and I said, God have mercy on you. Tell me about the Hanafiya, the religion of Abraham. And he replied, you are asking about something men do not inquire of today. The time has come near when a prophet will be sent with this religion from the people of the Haram. Go to him, for he will bring you to it. Then he went into the thicket, and Muhammad said to Salman, if you've told me the truth, you have met Jesus, the son of Mary. Now, I'm assuming this is 600 years after Jesus walked the earth, and maybe this Muslim here can explain to us in details in the comments later exactly where the evidence is for this claim. Otherwise, is Salman a liar? Is Muhammad a liar? Or was Jesus alive? Do you have evidence for this? Things like this, they are common, fake, fabricated stories like this. And the whole thing is they're trying to usurp the whole idea of Jesus to promote that, oh no, Jesus actually promoted Muhammad in the 7th century. Jesus was walking around in Syria healing the sick. Show me those records of a man healing the sick in Syria in the 7th century. Love to see it. So that was me. So
Just a quick remark before we start, Lloyd. Can you set up the stream on my channel?
It is running on your channel.
I think it's not working.
I checked it. It was running on your channel. I definitely checked it.
I don't see it on my channel. That's a issue I have.
It is.
We'll double check then.
Okay, no, it's running on. Hold on,
No, it's
because
not.
I can't set it up afterwards. I did add you.
Okay. So if you cannot do it now live, we'll catch up another time. Okay.
It's scheduled for 25:02, 7 p.m. Yeah, sorry. No, I checked JC's is working. No, yours was set up. Hold on, I did set it up. Sometimes I think the link doesn't always work. I think it's a glitch in YouTube or something. It's happened to JC. It's happened to me on my own streams as well.
It's happened to me also.
Yeah, I'm really sorry about that. We can restream it again, but I think this is
okay. No big deal.
Sorry about that.
No big deal at all. So let's go back to our presentation. We covered a lot of material. Let me get to the point where we left last week. Yeah, this was after the talk about the temple, the place of Abraham, and so on in the Quran. The Qibla, I think it was the last topic we discussed. The Qibla. And now we will talk about the Hajj and Umrah that we find in the Quran. That are related to the place of Abraham, the temple, the Masjid al-Haram, as we can read it in the text. So, what is Hajj? According to the Islamic narrative, it is the great pilgrimage to Mecca, which is to be done during the sacred months. So it's a ritual pilgrimage that happened once a year, and that was re-established or established by Muhammad when he conquered Mecca around 630, according to the Islamic narrative. We can already see that there is something a bit odd with the word Hajj. There is no logical connection between the meaning pilgrimage and the etymology, the Arabic etymology. In Arabic, HJJ, it means to argue, to discuss, but to argue. And it's been used a lot in the Quran with this meaning. Otherwise, it is also used with the meaning of making the pilgrimage or pilgrim and so on, to perform the Hajj. So we have several occurrences of the word with this meaning. And it's sort of the same with Umrah. Umrah, according to the Islamic narrative, it's also a pilgrimage to Mecca, but it's the lesser pilgrimage, a small pilgrimage. It isn't bound by the same ritual directions as the Hajj. The Hajj happens once a year, and you have to perform a series of rites during it. And in the Umrah, you can do it whenever you want. It's not once a year. And there are not as many rites as in the Umrah. But we have the same oddity here. There is no logical connection between the Arabic etymology, Ain Mimra, Arm, which means to maintain, to build, and the meaning of a pilgrimage. And it's quite clear in the Quran. It's very odd. So in the Quran, we have several occurrences of Umrah as a noun or as the verb, istamara, to perform Umrah. And so we have other occurrences of the same word, the same expression with the same Arabic roots. Some of them with the meaning of maintaining or to maintain. Some of them can nonetheless be linked to Masjid al-Haram or a sort of pilgrimage. And it's quite interesting to look at them in the text, because it shows us the meaning, the original meaning was something very, very religious, not maintained, actually. So if we look at all of the occurrences of Hajj and Umrah in the Quran, so I have kept a sort of code with colors in order to pinpoint and underline the various expressions we already saw. Like temple is always in orange, temple, or Masjid al-Haram, it's the same. The place of Abraham is in green. Umrah, or the route in Arabic, is in red, and Hajj, or the Hajj route, is in pink, as you can see. So there are here you have all the occurrences, all the mentions of Hajj and Umrah in the Quran. We can see here in the first verse in here in Surah 2, verse 158, that the Hajj and the Umrah are closely connected to the Bayt. They are to be performed at the Bayt, at the temple. And there is a mention of a Safa and a Marwa. So what are these? We will look at them in a moment. Another thing of interest, but I cannot see it because of the comment you put
sorry.
on.
I will take that away, my bad.
No, it's okay. No, it was not there. It's about the word Umrah and the meaning of it. Like I told you, in the Islamic narrative, it's supposed to be a pilgrimage, but it has also the meaning of maintaining. And we have 3 occurrences of the expression with this meaning of maintenance or maintaining that shows us that there is something more to it. Here in Surah 9, verse 17, we have a context that is quite different from the rest of the Quran. The context of Surah 9 is that the believers have finally conquered the holy city. They have finally got to the Masjid al-Haram and the Kaaba, and they reestablished the religion there. I don't know whether I won't argue here whether it talks about Mecca or Jerusalem, but it's quite clear if you read Surah 9 that the context has changed. And we see that it talks about the polytheists, so the associationists. It's not for them to maintain Muru, the mosques or the masjids of God. So it's you see how the meaning maintain is odd. What does it mean to maintain a mosque? It's not about changing the light bulbs or, I don't know, washing the floors.
Run one, to manage one, to keep one going, to do worship services.
To keep one going, but
why would non-believers keep a mosque going?
Yeah, exactly. It's not an Islamic mosque, of course. So I think here it refers to not to polytheists as such, but to Christians in Jerusalem that had the upper hand, that had that managed, like you said, Lloyd, some of the holy places of Jerusalem, like the Holy Sepulchre and so on.
Yeah.
And it's much more than maintaining or managing. It's actually, I think, servicing those places. And here I got this idea from a French Islamologist who translated the Quran in French. And if you look here in Surah 52, verse 4, this surah is a sort of apocalyptic vision of the thing that will happen when the end times will begin. And the preacher talks about these apocalyptic events and the signs there will be. And one of these signs is a temple that is Yamuru, that is either inhabited, frequented, maintained. Those are the meanings that we can find in Islamic translations. But Régis Blacher, the scholar I'm talking about, chose to translate it as serviced, a serviced temple, meaning that it is serviced by priests, that it has been put in active service. And here it takes a very interesting meaning if we look at it from the perspective of the Jerusalem thesis. It could be about the temple of Jerusalem being rebuilt and serviced by priests, meaning that the priests would perform sacrifices from the old Jewish religion. And it gives another meaning to Umrah then. Umrah is not a pilgrimage as such. Umrah has something to do, would have something to do with the service of the temple. And then if you look at the other occurrences of Umrah and Hajj, whoever performs the Hajj of the temple or performs Umrah, it would mean if you go to pilgrimage in Jerusalem and do your part at the temple. For example, you sacrifice a calf or a dove, like the Jews used to do in Moses' religion. Complete the Hajj and the Umrah. So go to Jerusalem, make the pilgrimage in Jerusalem, and make a sacrifice there. I think it's a meaning that would make much sense with this otherwise odd expression of Umrah. Another thing with the Hajj and Umrah in the Quran is that they are connected to rites of circumambulation.
Mm-hmm.
They are described as such. The temple, we already established that it is mostly the temple in Jerusalem that is the same as the standing place of Abraham and so on. There is a commandment that is given to Abraham and Ishmael to purify my temple for the ones who go around it. So there are rites of circumambulation going around the temple. We have the same in Surah 2. Is my reference okay there? I don't. I'm having just a little doubt. But anyway, this verse says, "Then we settled the place." So it's not the same expression here as the place, the makam. It's another word. It's not the makam. It's makan. We settled the place of the temple for Abraham. Do not associate anything with me, but purify my temple for the one who go around it, and the one who stand, and so on. And this other verse in Surah 22:29, one let them end their prescribed duty and fulfill their vows and circumambulate the ancient temple. So within Islam, within the Islamic narrative, it's all about Mecca, and they have a circumambulation in Mecca. And what is it exactly? Here we have a view, an eagle-eyed view of Mecca, of modern-day Mecca. Here you can see the Haram, the sanctuary, with the Kaaba in its center. And close to this sanctuary, we have the hills, supposedly hills of Safa and Marwa. Remember Safa and Marwa? We just saw them here in verse 158 in Surah 2. Indeed, the Safa and the Marwa are from the symbols of God. So whoever performs the Hajj of the temple and performs Umrah, no blame on him that he walks between them. This is not exactly, there are several rites of circumambulation. There are circumambulation around the Kaaba, and there are circumambulation between the mounts. People going from Safa to Marwa and so on, like a big circle. And they're supposedly imitating Hagar, who did such a thing when she went there with her son Ishmael, and she had no water, and she was looking everywhere for water, going from Safa to Marwa, back and forth 7 times, up until a miraculous source emerged, the well of Zamzam, which is in the here in the Haram.
But if you go through the Islamic sources, they have multiple versions of the story, but we know she walked 1,200 kilometers from Hebron to Mecca. Abraham walked with her. He left her under a tree. He walked back. He left her with some dates. And then either the boy's heel hit the ground and opened the well, or an angel came and his heel hit the ground and opened a well, or his wing scratched open a well. Or that's just 3 of the stories. And she ran from hill to hill looking for water. But Muslims also tell you Mecca is the oldest city in the world. It is the oldest temple in the world. It has been there longer since the time of Adam. Yet she was literally next to the well, didn't see it, didn't see people, didn't see trade, didn't see water, didn't see a temple, didn't see Mecca. And the Quran says, we left Hagar, or at least someone, my ancestors, not by name, in a barren place with nothing in the desert. So hold on, it's either barren or it's not. So the whole story is completely incoherent and completely just contradicted by the Quranic account. And it's again contradicted by the much later hadiths and seerah and such.
Exactly. You were talking about a tree, for example. There are no trees in Mecca. No tree can grow. No tree has ever grown in Mecca. So this story is all about a form of concordism. The fabricators of the Islamic narrative, the traditionists, the Islamic scholars, they invented stories in order to fit the text of the Quran and fit their general idea of what Islam should be and what its ancient history should have been. So,
and of course, the story of running between these 2 hills looking for water doesn't make any sense anyway. One could use one's imagination and say that if a person is potentially dying of thirst in the desert, what are they going to do? One option is that they could expand an area of search forlornly, looking for water, keep walking as long as you can keep walking in the direction that you think you might find some water, because hope is the only thing you've got at that stage. That's a possibility. It's not so unreasonable that you might climb a hill in order to look around in case you can see an oasis in the distance. Or if you fail, if neither of those appeal to you, you could pray and hope that God sends a miracle and spend your time in prayer. Or you could just resign yourself to the inevitable and just enjoy as best you can the last few hours that you're allowed on the earth. But none of those seem to have any relationship towards running between 2 fixed points 7 times. You do that once, maybe you think you missed something, you went back a second time. By the time you did it 3 times, there's nothing there. It makes absolutely no sense that somebody should run back and forth 7 times. and expend all their energy in that moment. It sounds a nonsense scenario, and my suspicion is that it's that the story was created in some way to justify some sort of activity. Probably the activity is based upon the text of the Quran,
Yep.
is Surat Al-Baqarah, verse 158, going between Safa and Marwa. Oh, well, there are a couple of stones. Let's call that one Safa and that one Marwa. You got to go between them. How many times? Oh, 7 times. Okay, why are we doing this? Oh, and then somebody comes up with the story. It seems like that. It doesn't have any kind of credibility to it.
Yeah,
No.
There is even a simpler, a more simple option than going from Safa to Marwa and so on. There is the option for Agar and his son and her son to go back to the last well they drank off, because they didn't magically appear in Mecca. There was a whole journey they took allegedly, supposedly, they walked along an itinerary where there were wells and oases and so on. So why not going back to the last oasis, which she already knew about, or the last well? It's another point that tells us this story is a complete invention, a nonsense invention.
May I just add something? In the general term of pilgrimage, unless I'm very much mistaken, normally people will go on pilgrimage to a place because something important happened. Like there is this place in France, Lourdes, where they said the Virgin appeared and now this water is miraculous. So people go there, or people will go on pilgrimage to follow on the footsteps of Paul or something of the sort. So basically, a saint performed a miracle, or someone very important walked down this path, and then you go and you try to do that same thing. So an event happens, and then people do the pilgrimage in there. But even according to their narrative, people were going to Mecca on pilgrimage, all of these pagans, they were doing it before, nothing to do with the Abrahamic faith. And then it gets rebranded and said, no, it's Abrahamic. By the way, all of the prophets in the Abrahamic faith were buried here. And it's like, guys, normally it's the other way around. If the whole thing if the story would have been, people go to Mecca because the last prophet was born there. That's it. People will go on pilgrimage to Mecca because Muhammad was born there. Done. No problem. But instead of that, they fabricated the whole story about going back in time, and that's where they messed up. They didn't have to do any of that effort. All they had to say is, that's the city of Muhammad, like Christians would go to Bethlehem or to places like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really, there is really a sort of invention pattern here. It really looks like it has been invented way centuries, millenaries after the facts, the supposedly facts that happened.
The narrative seems quite confused as to whether this is a Abrahamic shrine or a pagan shrine. So sometimes when it has to be Abrahamic, people say, oh, well, it was always known that it was built by Abraham and Ishmael. When it needs to be pagan, oh, well, Muhammad had to come and purify it and cleanse it from all the idols. And this business about people going back and forth 7 times between Safa and Marwa, it seems like it's in the Abrahamic tradition, but that they were doing that before. No one quite knows how the black stone fits into the Abrahamic narrative. What's that doing there? Why didn't Muhammad get rid of it if it's pagan? The whole thing, the narrative seems quite confused about whether it's an Abrahamic shrine or a pagan shrine. It can't. In my mind, the narrative doesn't get its story straight on this at all.
Exactly. It's even more confusable or odd that the hills of Safa and Marwa are not hills. Actually, they are boulders. They are not mounds or hills. They are just big rocks. Nowadays, they have been covered with a structure and cupolas here that we can see here and here. But this is what they look like, and clearly they are not hills. But nonetheless, millions of pilgrims are doing the circumambulation around those two boulders. But the thing here, and you know this already, Paul, is that it's all a copy. It's from another site. Safa and Marwa that are mentioned in the Quran, we can also find them in Jerusalem. Here is a view of Jerusalem. You can see where is my yeah, it's here. You can see the Dome of the Rock here with the esplanade of the mosque. Here is Mosque Al-Aqsa. This is the Mount of Olives. The Mount of Olives here. And the Dome of the Rock is built on Mount Moriah, which is a temple mount. And Moriah in Arabic can translate or can be said as Marwa. But that's not all. There is also a Mount Safa in Jerusalem. In Latin, it used to be Mount Scopus, coming from the Greek scopain, which can be translated as observatory or belvedere, a place where you can see afar. It was from the pilgrims who were coming to Jerusalem in the ancient times. It was the place where they could see the Temple Mount, which is why it has this name of Scopus or Scopain in Western languages. But in Hebrew, it was called Mount Safa. We have this in the Jewish antiquities of Flavius Josephus. So what could be going back and forth between Mount Moriah and Mount Safa in Jerusalem? You would have to go along the Kidron Valley, Nahal Kidron in Hebrew, and in the Bible and the Jewish tradition, it is the place of the judgment of the nations judgment. In Joel in particular, it's called the Valley of Jehoshaphat. It is the Valley of Decision. In the end times, all nations will be gathered here. So it's a gathering place. And it's also an expression that you see in the Quran in verse 597, the gathering place, where everyone stands with the word kam, the word Makkah, makom, the place where everyone stands in trial before God. And so you see here that if we apply the Jerusalem geography to the Quranic verse, let me go back to it. Indeed, the Mount Safa in Jerusalem and the Mount Moriah are from the symbol of God. So whoever performs the pilgrimage to the temple, the Temple Mount, and performs a sacrifice or a service to the temple, no blame on him when he walks between them.
Yeah.
This gives a new meaning to this verse. The meaning would be, if you go to Jerusalem and honor the temple, make a sacrifice there, for example, there will be no blame on you on Judgment Day. And I think it's a very interesting meaning. It's much more meaningful than the idea of imitating Hagar in the desert of Mecca. And you can see that there is absolutely nothing about Hagar in this verse or in the contextual verses here.
Yeah.
And,
Can I show something as well? That's remember we had this book by the Italian traveler who went to Mecca in the 1500s or 1500s. And he spoke of a tiny little building, just a few paces wide on every side, that he found in Mecca, and then he left, right? And he wrote this book, which we covered briefly, and which we got from JC. And you can see it from Bain Bass. And it says here, you've got the Zoroastrian Kabaye. This is exactly the same building that we showed last time. That's a few paces on the side. It's the Zoroastrian Kabaye. The Kabaye. So that's, I mean, you got this little square place, the Kabaye. I mean, so yeah, we have exactly so this is odd. I mean, you got the same name, Kaaba, but and it matches the description we have from an actual historical account from a traveler. And I mean, the modern Mecca Kaaba, I mean, we've seen is made of cinder block, and it's clearly of recent construction.
Yeah. And you see, it's a bit of a digression, but it's interesting nonetheless. Lloyd, can you go back to the pictures of your Kaaba of Zoroaster? In the 7th century and after, it wouldn't have looked like this because there were what do you call this dirt and rocks that almost covered it. Only the top of the building was emerging from the ground, and so it looked very much like a cube. It used to look very much like a cube, and there has been works and excavation around it to I think it was in the 19th century, maybe the 20th, in order to restore it. And now we see it not as a cube, but as a rectangle. A tower. But in 1,000 years ago, it would have looked like a cube emerging from the ground.
Right.
And if we go back to Jerusalem, I don't know, I don't remember the exact emplacement, the exact location, but here in the Kidron Valley, there was a Kaaba. It was the Kaaba of Mary, which is a tomb, one of her tombs. There are many traditions about Mary's death or dormition. There is one in Turkey, modern day Turkey, but there was one in Jerusalem, and I don't know exactly. It must be around the old cemetery here. There was a monument, a Kaaba, that was called in the antiquity the Kaaba of Mary. So interesting point. If you walk back and forth between Mount Scopus and Mount Moriah, you will encounter a Kaaba. All of this tells us about the real Umrah and the real Hajj. We can. I'm sorry, my animation is there is a little defect. Hajj and Umrah, if you look at the meaning and the etymology of these two expressions, according to Robert Kerr, in this huge book, Christmas in the Quran, there is a study called that he wrote, Aramaisms in the Quran and their significance, and he established that Hajj is not an Arabic word, which explains why there was no logical connection between the Islamic Hajj, which means pilgrimage, and the word Hajj in Arabic, which means to argue. Actually, it's a direct borrowing from Aramaic. In Aramaic and also in Hebrew, we have the word hag.
Yeah.
Hag is exactly the same, which means to circle, to go around. And in Hebrew and in Aramaic, it has taken, it has the meaning has derived to refer to feasts and festivities around the temple in Jerusalem, where Jews used to walk around, circle around the temple. So when you mention Hag to a Jew, even nowadays, for him it means a religious festival at the Jerusalem temple with circumambulation. And in a more derived meaning, it means going to Jerusalem for a religious purpose. He looked also at the word Omra, which also comes from Aramaic. In Aramaic, it means to dwell, to inhabit. So it's sort of as a connection with the Arabic meaning to be frequented. But the meaning to dwell is much more connected in Aramaic to leading a monastic life. And so in a derived meaning, there is this idea of devotion to God, a consecration to God. And it's a very interesting point from Robert Kerr, because it goes very well with the idea of service that we can find also in Arabic as a derived meaning, like I told you. So what could be Hajj and the Hajj exactly? If you look at the Jewish expression, we have Hajj for Pesach, we have Hajj for every major feast or festivity in Jerusalem. For example, the Hajj of Shavuot. The Hajj of Shavuot is very interesting because its rites have some similarities with rites in Mecca, in the pilgrimage in Mecca. It's a feast of the first fruits. Originally, it's a feast of the spring or the late spring, where the earth gives its first fruits, and it became, with Judaism, the feast of the giving of the Torah by God, with an analogy with the first fruits. And also in Christianity, it became the Pentecost. And you have a description of, in the book of Jubilees, of Abraham performing the feast of the first fruit. He took branches of palm trees, the fruit of goodly trees, and every day going around the altar with the branches 7 times. So here you have the tradition. You have a source for the seven circles tradition that we find in Judaism and also in Islam. Robert Kerr's conclusion is that I will quote him here directly: the pilgrimage to Mecca, so the Hajj, the Islamic Hajj, and the Umrah, is not so much the Islamic reinterpretation of an indigenous Hijazi rite, an ancient Arab rite, but rather the late transposition of a Syro-Palestinian, Judeo-Christian one to the Hijaz. And we can, from there, we can put forth that this Syro-Palestinian Judeo-Christian rite was to be performed in Jerusalem. But the thing is, in the 7th century, in the first part of the 7th century, Jerusalem was under a Christian rule. So the question is how can a believer perform the Hajj in Jerusalem in the context of the early 7th century with a Christian rule over Jerusalem? The place was forbidden to non-Christian not everybody could come to Jerusalem under this Christian rule and perform rites on the Temple Mount. So it gives us elements of context to understand the Quran. Understand, for example, why the Masjid al-Haram was named Haram as forbidden.
Yeah, that's like the Holy of Holies, where the Jewish high priest can only enter once a year, but then that would be corrupted, and then of course
it's another meaning for Haram.
Yeah.
It's another meaning for Haram. But we will go back to this interpretation of Jerusalem being forbidden to believers in a bit.
I wonder if I could just interpose one or two observations. It's absolutely fascinating, as Odon says. It's something that I've discussed with him in the past. The term Hag, the Jewish phrase. Well, in the book of I think Deuteronomy, isn't it, where God, Yahweh, says to his people that they must keep 3 feasts. And they must all go to the place where the Lord will point out to them, the place that the Lord will choose. And at this stage, of course, back during the wandering in the wilderness, none of the Israelites would know where that place was. Later on, it becomes recognized in Judaism as Jerusalem, but in the words of the Torah or the Pentateuch, Jerusalem isn't mentioned at that stage. But the names of the feasts are mentioned, and each feast, there are 3 feasts, and each one seems to have 2 names, because each one has an agricultural significance and also a significance in relation to the sacred history of the Israelite people, the Jewish people. And so between the 3 feasts, each having 2 names, you've got 6 names, and all 6 of them begin with the word Hag. You've got Hag Hamatzot, which is the Feast of the Unleavened Bread, which is also known as the Hag HaPaseh, which was commonly called in English the Passover. You've got the Hag HaKazir, which is the first fruits, and the Hag Shavuot, which is the Feast of Weeks, commemorating Moses' receipt of the law on Mount Sinai. And you've got the Hag Asib, which is the Feast of the First Fruits, which is also known as a Hag Sukkot, or the Feast of Booths, remembering the 40 years in the wilderness. So the word Hag would have been extremely familiar and evocative to any Jewish person. To now, for Christians living in Europe, the word might not be so much, but to any Jew, I imagine, any Hebrew-speaking Jew at any time, these would be tremendously powerful words. It's just not possible that the Quran author could have chosen to call their pilgrimage the Hajj and not have expected his Jewish audience or anyone who was familiar with the Torah not to say, oh, hang on, that's the same name as all our pilgrimage feasts. So the term automatically, you could have other feasts in other places. No, it's not that in itself isn't conclusive proof, but it's a strong sign that he chose a name. The Quran author would have chosen a name that had great resonance in relation to the Hebrew feasts that were celebrated at Jerusalem.
Yeah, it seems evident. There is something. Yeah, of course. Go on, JC.
Just to add something, not just about the word, but about what happens, and joining this to the beginning. So what you have shown, Odon, which is the Quran showing Safa and Marwa and pilgrimage, and it's like anybody with half a brain would conclude, okay, this has to be Jerusalem. We have Safa and Marwa. That's it. Then Mecca is not even attested until the 8th century, and then Safa and Marwa by miracle, they appear there, and they are not even mountains. They're just two big rocks. Anybody who had any decency from scholars and so on should just actually come out and says, guys, this has gone on for too long. The Quran is talking about Safa and Marwa pilgrimage. This is Jerusalem. Later, they call those two stones Safa and Marwa. And now in the 21st century, people still die going on pilgrimage to Mecca. Can we just stop this nonsense? But instead of just saying something as basic as the Quran is not talking about Mecca, and it is incredibly obvious, everybody seems to just not want to talk about these things. Let's not upset people. It's like, guys, they've copy-pasted. People should start talking about this. It's obvious, no? What you have just shown.
I am.
Really. And when one juxtaposes, we've got Safa and Marwa, we could just put Safa to one side for a moment. If we only focus on Marwa and Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 158, talks about people who are making the Hajj going to Marwa. If we just pauses there and just put Safa to one side, you've chosen the word Hajj that is resonant of the Jewish Hajj festivals that were celebrated at Jerusalem, and then you've said that the Hajj pilgrims must go to Marwa, which is the standard Arabic transliteration or way of pronouncing Mount Moriah, which is the very place in Jerusalem where all these where the temple was built and all these festivals would have been celebrated. So you've got taking the word that would sound like the Hajj in Arabic, Arabicized, and then you've got the place called Moriah, again Arabicized, and you've got the people making the Hajj to Moriah. I mean, how obvious. You have to really, I don't know how anyone can look at this and not form. I'm happy to talk about Safa, I could talk about that all evening, but I don't see how you've just got people making the Hajj to Marwa. That isn't slam dunk. That's proof that it must be a reference to the Israelites doing the pilgrimage of the Old Testament to Mount Moriah, which is named in the Old Testament.
No, it cannot just be coincidences.
Well, but, even if it was a coincidence, it would have been so obvious to any person listening to this who is familiar with the Bible that they must have said, "Oh, that's a bit of a coincidence." Right back at the time, it's not possible that it could have been this bizarre coincidence and to have been missed by everyone. And compare this with a constant, unrelenting saturation in the Bible of biblical stories, biblical characters, biblical themes, biblical turns of phrase. It's simply not possible that you could also have the Hajj to Mount Moriah and this. Oh yes, it's all about this place called Mecca that no one's ever heard of.
I mean, the Quran is debating the Bible with other, shall we say, heretical believers, Jewish, Christian, whatever, but it's not preaching to pagans. And then I often listen to academics, obviously we all have, and they know there's something off. They know that this is not believable as written, but yet they don't want to be Salman Rushdie, is my thought. And the university makes far too much money. I mean, Qatar has spent, $6.5 billion in the last 10 years on universities in America alone. Who knows what they've spent in Europe? So maybe the dean doesn't want the funding to dry up.
Yeah, exactly. Qatar, for example, they finance a whole new aisle in the Oxford University dedicated to Islamic studies. Something like 15 or 20 years ago, maybe a bit more. So it's not actually, technically, it's not part of the Oxford University. The students studying there don't get an Oxford University diploma, but they still get an Oxford Islamic Studies Oxford diploma. And when the Qatari did this, they imposed Tariq Ramadan as a teacher there. I don't know if you know about Tariq Ramadan.
Accused of
He's,
rape, I believe. I believe he was convicted. He's also, his grandfather was like what, the head of the Muslim Brotherhood, and
he
well known to
fell.
be
He fell from the heights
yeah.
where he used to dwell. He's the grandson of Hassan el-Banna, the founder
of the Muslim Brotherhood. Yeah.
of the Muslim Brotherhood.
The
And he used
incubator
to
of
be-
all of the Islamic terrorist organizations. Yeah.
He used to be one of the leading preachers and influencer in the French-speaking sphere about Islam. But that's the thing with that's one thing with academia. It goes back to our introduction. But if we go back to the Jerusalem thesis, there was a comment from Paul, not Paul Ellis, Paul L.R. that you displayed, Lloyd. Paul said there are basically Arabs imitating Jews and trying to replace them, and now steal the land again.
Yep.
And I would want to add my grain of salt, because it's not about. I think it's not about Arabs imitating Jews. I think it's Arabs being taught by Jews about Jerusalem, about Safa and Marwa in Jerusalem, about the Hajj, about the Umrah, about what to do in Jerusalem. They did not invent this by themselves.
Yeah.
You see, the Arabs from the desert, they did not invent this knowledge of Safa and Marwa and of the Hajj and the Jewish traditions. Some Jews had to tell them, had to teach them.
Agreed.
Yeah.
My point here, it's one of the arguments of my my thesis, my hypothesis, that during early Islam, there were at least one faction that was led by a Jewish group.
Also, before you say something, JC, just give me 1 second. Just that, obviously, there are those who don't like the historical critique, right? That they would prefer to indulge in going in circles on theological debate, which doesn't really go anywhere. However, man, now I've just lost my thread. However, but if we put the archaeological question, if we put the historical question, if we ask for evidence on this score, because if Islam is true, then it has evidence on its side. They can't produce that. I just wish that everyone would actually just ask these basic questions. I mean, if academics would ask for evidence on these basic questions, then we could also just solve this, because they could not answer these questions. And I don't know, academia is negligent to me. JC, you were going to say?
Yes, just a quick observation. So lots of people in the comment section, they're saying in the chat, they're saying, yeah, they copied everything. Everything is plagiarized. And it's like, yes, it is. Look how much they copied. They copied even circumcision. That should tell you how far they're willing to go with plagiarism.
Oh, far, yeah. Yeah,
although I think that there are reports of Arabs practicing circumcision from long before the Quran. So I think that was a practice. I think the Jewish tradition is a tremendously powerful one in terms of seizing the imagination. Even people who say, "Oh well, I don't believe in God, but I regard myself as a cultural Christian," they show the power of the ideas, the stories, the themes of Judaism, and how important they have been. So I'm not entirely surprised that that people say the Arabs who for some time beforehand would have practiced circumcision. There are reports. I forget, but even the great Elagabalus, and I'm not quite sure if we want to go to Elagabalus, but he was a Roman emperor who was recruited. Who was recruited, a Roman emperor who was recruited from the from what we might call Arabia, and he was circumcised, wasn't he? So
He was
So I
from
think
Syria, but he was an Arab, yeah. And
He
there
was
were
from that
other
part. He was
Roman
from Arabia, I think, wasn't he?
like him.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is it possible, Odon, before we move on, because this all looks great, but is it possible to go back to that slide you had with the with Safa and Marwa? Is it possible to go back there?
I was sharing just. I'm not moving on here. It's just something I forgot to put in my presentation, which is in my book. This is the PDF file of the Great Secret of Islam that you can get here on my website for free. And there was another interesting interpretation for Umrah. Umrah could also refer or relate to the Jewish Omer. And Omer, it's a sheaf, a biblical unit of measure, a sort of a bucket of grain, for example. And it's an offering that is supposed to be done during Passover. So you see, there can be also a connection if you look at let me go back to the presentation. If you look at the meaning of the verse, how do I share my screen here? Let me go back here. So whoever performs the Hajj of the temple and then gives the offering, so no blame on him that he walks between them. So it could be also connected to this. But let me go back to the...
Are Muslims aware of this? I mean, are Muslims aware of this? Is this starting to have an impact outside of just academia? I mean, we're talking about it. We're not, shall we say, strictly speaking, academics. We're in the public sphere. And surely this is noted by Muslim imams or those who are on YouTube. And this must bother them. I mean, because if we just consistently ask them and point out these I mean, just ask them, where's the Injil then? Please give us a copy.
Yeah.
You know, well,
they cannot answer this. You see, there was a debate between a Muslim apologist and two friends of mine last Friday, I guess. I think it was Friday in France. And one of these two friends put forth my research and also Paul's on Mecca. And the only answer the apologist had was to quote sources from the 7th century mentioning Mecca. He had no answer on the, what do you say that, on the real evidence, for example, that there is no water on Mecca. His only answer was that some sources in the 7th century mention Mecca, so the whole of the Islamic narrative must be true. You see how logic seems to
but here the argument's been bastardized into almost a theological argument as opposed to actual hard evidence. And this is where they have a severe weakness, and they've steered this argument and they've been entertained. And if we bring them to say, look, fine, you know, we believe you, now show us hard archaeological evidence, show us the hydrology, show us how many palm trees were there and how many liters a day does a fully grown palm tree use, you know, and let's work out, you know, where's the rivers, show us the where they were fishing.
Exactly, yeah. How many camels can you have in Mecca without water?
Yeah, I mean, we need to the archaeological, historical, evidence-based argument, and not
a camel drinks 40 liters of water a day. Where do you find this in Mecca?
Yeah, and a palm tree we said was about 180 liters a day, and you know, fully grown tree. And we looked through these different trees. Date trees are like 70 liters a week per tree, and they said this place is a paradise. So okay, that's a lot of water.
Yeah, Paul, you wanted to add something. You asked me to display this slide.
You see, I think that 2158 is the only single verse of the Quran that on its own you could disregard the other 6,000 or whatever. That one verse demonstrates that the Quran is about Jerusalem. There is simply no other explanation. You know that the Jerusalem was regarded as the house of God to the Israelites, and had been for thousands of years. We know that the Quran dwells on the stories of the Israelites, of Moses and Abraham and so on. So Abraham doesn't count as an Israelite, but the Hebrew Bible figures. And then you've got Mount, and then it names one place as Mount of Marwa, which is the standard Arabic pronunciation of Moriah. I just wanted to mention about the Safa. You see, it's called Mount Scopus there. The term Safa is an archaic Greek form of the name, and this is, as Odon mentioned, appears in Flavius Josephus's Antiquities of the Jews. But when does Josephus mention this Safa? And he mentions it in the story of how Jerusalem had been surrendered to Alexander the Great. Yeah. So according to the story, Alexander the Great is fighting with the Achaemenid Empire, and he'd asked the Jerusalem authorities to surrender the city to him, and they said, no, we'll wait and see who wins the battle. So playing it a bit cautious. Well, Alexander wins the battle, and then they're anxious that they didn't surrender quickly enough. And so the story is that the high priest and various other officials all go out to Mount Scopus and to meet Alexander when Alexander turns up with his army. So Alexander turns up in his army, and the high priest and all the elders of the city meet him on Mount Scopus with Jerusalem behind them. And then the story is that Alexander is persuaded by seeing them not to sack Jerusalem and not to take out any punitive action. Now that's important for two reasons for the Quran. One of them is that this relies upon both a Jewish and a Christian understanding of Alexander as a righteous Gentile, as somebody who didn't form part of the Abrahamic tradition, but who nevertheless had kingly virtue and was able to recognize holiness when he saw it. And this feeds into other Christian myths about Alexander the Great, such as his search for the font of eternal life, which is a metaphor, an allegory for baptism, and these stories find their way, and his imprisoning of Gog and Magog behind a wall, where they'll break out on the last day. And these are stories that appear in the Quran. The story of Alexander looking for the stream of eternal life, or the fountain of eternal life, that appears in the story of Moses and the fish. Alexander sort of turns into Moses, but he is still nevertheless, from the story, quite recognizable. And also is recognizable even more so in Dhul Qarnayn, this figure who goes from the place where the sun rises to the place where the sun sets, and then imprisons Yajuj and Majuj behind the wall that's made of iron and brass, just as in the legend of Alexander, he imprisons Gog and Magog behind a wall of iron and brass. Mm-hmm. So these are possibly coincidences. So the very context in which Josephus calls Mount Scopus Safa would itself have meant something to the Quranic community. It's not some random abstract, this is what one person once called it. The actual context meant meant a lot within the context of the Quran itself. I'd also mention that the significance of going between Safa and Marwa, or Mount Scopus, Safa, and Mount Moriah, that's a very important journey in the Jewish and Christian tradition. It's not just it's not some random coincidental, we found two rocks and you can walk between the two of them. This is something with a very, very long history, a very long pedigree of sacrality. So back in the book of Exodus, the ritual of the red heifer has to take place outside the camp. So when they established Jerusalem, this takes place on the Mount of Olives. So the high priest would take the red heifer out and sacrifice it to create the lustral water that will remove the impurity of a contact with a dead person. So the red heifer ritual is connected with removing the impurity of death. And that would take place on the Mount of Olives. The Messiah is expected in the book of Ezekiel to arrive on the Mount of Olives and then to cross over the Kidron Valley and enter the Jerusalem from the east door, the east gate, and thereby to judge humanity that is arranged in the plain below, which is a scene that appears in the Quran many dozens and dozens of times. It refers to this as being the outcome of history, where it's all leading to the judging of mankind by God or God's emissary. So you've got, and of course Jesus. Let's not leave Jesus out of this, because Jesus enters. He makes three very important journeys across the Kidron Valley. Jesus goes into Jerusalem on a donkey from the Mount of Olives, so thereby symbolically entering Jerusalem from the east. Then he is on the night of his arrest on Monday, Thursday. Jesus is captured by the guards and taken in to Jerusalem, which is where, in Christian theology, the first act of the Passion that ends up defeating death for Christians and giving us all the new covenant of eternal life in Jesus. And then Jesus makes a return trip when he goes back from Jerusalem to the Mount of Olives in order to have the ascension, because Jesus ascends from the Mount of Olives in front of the disciples, who then return back to Jerusalem in the Gospel of St. Luke. And the Gospel of St. Luke ends with the disciples going back and preaching about Jesus within the temple. So this isn't some random journey between 2 points. This is a hugely, hugely important route. And the possibility that not only does the Quran talk about the Hajj, being the same word that the Bible uses for all these pilgrimages at the temple, not only uses Moriah, but also talks about Safa, which has the significance of Alexander the Great, and where the route between Safa and Marwa is so charged, religiously charged for the biblical tradition. It is simply not possible. I challenge anyone, if any Muslims are out there, a nice little research task for them is to find any other settlement in human history that has had a Safa and a Marwa besides Jerusalem. I don't think it can be done. And certainly, even if you could find some place, somewhere that's got a Safa and a Marwa, it couldn't possibly have this loaded history, much of which relates to the Quran and the Quran stories itself. To my mind, Surah Al-Baqarah, verse 158, is an absolute smoking gun. There is no other possible explanation except that it is talking about going from the Mount of Olives to Jerusalem.
Just political correctness obviously doesn't want to insult someone's beliefs, but at what point do we go like, look, I'm sorry, but this is bullshit?
Well, I was wondering,
I actually
Lloyd,
think I would say that point it's already past. It should have been done many decades ago, and every second is 1 second too late. Just to add to all of this very briefly, that everything that you guys have mentioned, and now you Paul have mentioned as well, shows how the narrative was invented. The Quran told one story, and then they have to make it into that new place called Mecca. So the Quran mentions Safa and Marwa. So now it has to be in that place where they want people to go and so on. So Safa and Marwa, they appear as if by miracle in the middle of nowhere that had not been attested. So all of these little things, they show us how they invented the narrative. So it's incredibly important information.
And one small little point is these two mountains in Mecca. Someone uses the phrase hillocks for them. I think the story of Hagar running between the two of them is a load of hillocks, because no one can explain where these names come from. Why did anybody back in the day, back in the time of Hagar, why did anybody ever think of giving these two rocks names at all? And when they did get names, what did these names mean? Is there a reason why they called one Safa and one Marwa? Did these names mean anything? I can't find any evidence of this. Surely they would have been called Hagar's Hill, or Jabal Hagar, or when they call one Hagar and one Ishmael, or they would have had some meaning about the story of Hagar running between the two looking for water. Where did these names come from? And the answer is, we know where they come from. They come from Jerusalem, and these are just two effectively random hills that have just been given Jerusalem names in the middle of the desert.
Yep.
Yeah, a very, very good point, Paul. It's almost the same with the names of prophets and biblical figures in the Quran. They don't mean anything in Arabic. Jibril, for example, doesn't mean anything in Arabic, whereas Gabriel comes from Gabar El, meaning the force of God, for example, and it has a meaning in Hebrew or Aramaic. Musa doesn't mean anything in Arabic. Moses comes from ancient Egyptian and also Hebrew, and it has different meanings in these languages, but it has none in Arabic. It's exactly the same as Safa and Marwa. They are completely abstract and artificial names in Arabic. They only mean something in another culture, another language. And obviously, it's proof that they were borrowed from these languages and cultures.
When we see it, it seems so obvious. But it's not just academics getting funding from the Gulf in the 21st century. And this has been evident. It's been staring people in the face for the whole of the 1,400 years that the Quran has been with us. There's no reason why anyone in the 7th century or the 8th century or the 9th century couldn't have read verse 158 and said, oh, when it talks about the Hajj going to Marwa, it's talking about the Hajj going to Moria.
Well,
and scholars, I read that. That was Josephus wrote that. There's no reason why people couldn't have said this 1,400 years ago. It's incredible how it has completely slipped under everyone's radar.
Well, if you go back to as far as the 17th century or 16th century, if I recall, and certainly in the 19th century, there were English scholars. I've looked at some of their notes. I've covered them on the channel. In fact, Odon, I didn't do that show that I was talking about, but when we get to that, these scholars actually say, no, Islam is a concoction. It is clearly derived from other stories, and it's borrowing, and they go through the sources of where all these stories come from. And scholars have been saying this for 500 years. European scholars have been saying this. Just modern scholars, of course, it's now a religion of peace, got rebranded by George W. Bush, and now, of course, you don't want to offend people, do you? Because they're brown.
Okay. Paul, you were speaking about the Kidron Valley, Mount of Olives, and this location in Jerusalem as being charged with end times expectations and apocalyptic visions within the Christian and Jewish tradition. And I think at the time, I thought at the time it was the perfect transition for the next slide, because the next slide is about these expectations in the Islamic tradition. It's something very, very strange. If we look at some authors from the Islamic tradition, they still thought that Jerusalem was the place of the apocalypse. These are excerpts from two authors from the 10th century, so Ibn al-Murajjah, Ibn al-Faqih. They wrote books of traditions about places. It's a very common thing within the Islamic tradition. So a story about Beit al-Maqdis, the temple in Jerusalem, and so on. And you see there are some excerpts here that show how much they still believed in the 10th century that Jerusalem was the God's place, that it was the place of the end times, the place of judgment. For example, the rock of Jerusalem is one of the rock of paradise. We find in the Torah that God said to the rock of Jerusalem, "You are my lowest throne, and from you I ascended into heaven, and below you the earth is extended, and all the water that flows from the tops of the mountain comes from below you. The fresh water and the winds that bring rain."
Descend to the lowest throne as well. That's the lowest that he comes. He descends to the lowest throne in the Quran. He doesn't come to earth. He comes to the lowest throne. So there you've got
the early Islam was about Jerusalem, and we still have traces of this Jerusalem focus in the Islamic tradition, even though they invented Mecca and so on. Some writing were kept from censorship or destruction, but they are very they're not very few people know about it. It took someone like Guillaume D. I took it from one of his lessons to rediscover how traditionists still worshipped Jerusalem, and you will see it in Ibn al-Faqih, the one the excerpt I put in bold. The gathering and resurrection of the dead will take place in Jerusalem. It is the place of gathering, like in verse 97 in Surah 5. God will destroy Gog and Magog in Jerusalem. All fresh water of the origin under the rock, and so on. The rock is a navel of the world. It's very, very, very odd to you see, there was this whole process of fabricating a new narrative, inventing a new city, destroying evidence. But even with all the care that the caliphs and the scholars could have in destroying evidence and changing history, some remained in these writings, for example. So it's another argument for the Jerusalem thesis.
I think Odon, a lot of Muslims now would expect that the end times will play out in Jerusalem. I think there's an expectation that when the end of the world comes and the plane of judgment, although humanity is gathered, I think a lot of Muslims expect that to take place in Jerusalem. There's that you mentioned the graveyard. outside the eastern gate of the Temple Mount, which is evidence for all to see that that a lot of Muslims back in the day wanted to be in situ, wanted to have a fairly short journey to judgment.
But it's
And
really
indeed,
odd.
one thing I noticed, or I learned fairly recently, is that they thought that the bridge of Sirat was going to go across the Kidron Valley. So the bridge was, there is actually a piece of stonework sticking out from the eastern wall of the Temple Mount, and they call that the Pillar of Muhammad. And there is a tradition that is going to be one end of the bridge of Sirat, and people are going to cross over. So I think there's an expectation within Islam that Jerusalem is the place of judgment at the end of time.
Yeah, it's really odd because there is nothing really in the Islamic tradition, in the Islamic narrative, the standardized narrative, the life of Muhammad and so on. There is not nothing. There is not much to connect Jerusalem to Islam. We talked about the Qibla in the Islamic narrative. The first believers with Muhammad, they were praying toward Jerusalem without knowing why. And the only thing that connects Jerusalem to the Islamic narrative, the standardized Islamic narrative, is the night journey. It's the only reason for Jerusalem to be a holy city in the Islamic narrative. There are no reason for Jerusalem to be the place where the gathering and resurrection of the dead will take place, outside of this night journey. And it's, again, a perfect transition for the next slide, which is about the night journey. So you all know about this episode in the Islamic narrative. It's all based on one verse, first verse of Surah 17, which says, "Glory to the one who sent his servant on a journey by night from the sacred mosque," so Masjid al-Haram, to the distant mosque, Masjid al-Aqsa, whose surrounding we have blessed, so that we might show him some of our signs. Surely he is the hearing, the seeing. And from this single verse, there was a story that was developed that Muhammad flew by night on a winged horse or a winged donkey or a winged beast. Here on this Persian miniature, we see that the beast is a donkey. It has a donkey's tail, but its head is a woman's head. And we know the story. So Muhammad flew by night from Mecca to Jerusalem. He landed on the Temple Mount, and from there he ascended to heavens, where God showed him some of his signs, like it is said in the verse, meaning a celestial Quran, the celestial Quran. And from there, he went back to Mecca. And it was a great sign of his prophethood to the people. It demonstrated how God had chosen him to be his prophet. Because on the way back from the heavens to Mecca, he was, for example, able to see a caravan in the desert. And when he arrived in Mecca, he announced that this caravan was to arrive. And it was a miracle because how could he know where the caravan was? It was proof that he went to the heavens on a winged horse.
Yeah, but, can I throw in something? Yeah. I want to throw in a couple of things. I mean, one, he went to Jerusalem, to the temple that wasn't built for another 90 years.
Yeah.
Right, which is fascinating. The hadiths, his wife claims, no, he never went anywhere. He was in bed all night. And then other hadiths go, oh, yeah, no, he went in spirit. It's like, yeah. This is also the Artavira, the night journey with Sarosh. And this is obviously from Zoroastrianism again, right? And of course, you've got similar, you've got these similar sort of from Islam. You've got this whole idea of the woman, right? You've got, anyway, but long story short, you've got this peacock wings, you've got the horse's body, you've got something else's tail, you've got a woman's face. And of course, in the Islamic story, Muhammad gets on the winged horse or thing, or whatever it is. He goes up to heaven with the angel Jibreel. In many stories, an angel goes with him. In some stories, he goes alone. But in one of them, the horse won't go up. So Jibreel punches it in the face to make it comply, which is crazy. But in the Arda Viraz Namag, Zoroastrianism has a winged horse-like creature with a human head. So the Artavira, he makes a night journey to heaven under the guidance of the angel Sarosh in an old book known as the Book of Artavira. They describe the journey of a saintly priest who goes into a trance and his spirit goes up to heavens under the guidance of the angel Sarosh. He passes from one utopia to another until he gets to Ormazd, the great deity of the whole universe. And he sees the heavens, how happy its inhabitants are, and then he goes back to earth as the messenger to tell all that he has seen and heard. And then Ormazd commanded that his followers apparently pray 5 times a day. Not sure I've heard that anywhere before. And then, of course, in both religions, there's a specified worship of 5 times a day, commanded by God. And Zoroastrianism and Islam share a specified worship in relation to the movement of the sun. The Zoroastrians call this worship Ga or Ja, right? And the term means period of time or place. So very, very interesting that you've got this, and then of course Dr. Shabir Ali deals with this, and of course they actually come and say, well, actually Zoroaster was a prophet of Allah. He actually was a prophet of Allah, and Allah, he was just prior to Muhammad. He was actually preaching Islam, which is completely retarded, but there you are.
Mm-hmm.
So. Yeah. And here you got a woman's face. This is Muhammad and the angels, and there's lots of interesting stories around this as well. Some very odd things around that.
If I may just add something as well. Just joining this with the other series that Lloyd is showing now about the monotheism series, that the Quran seemed to have one origin, is Judeo-Christian, but when we get to the traditions, that's when they seem to be copying from everything that is around. So the whole thing with the Burak, which actually looks very Persian, as we see in the depictions, it looks like by the time that they're creating the religion, they are borrowing really from everybody. And we can see these weird references that they are not found in the Abrahamic faith in the traditions. So we see how they are making things up as they are in different lands, trying to justify their book as divine in the Abrahamic faith.
They're trying to
and then it has nothing to do with it.
I mean, they're clearly integrating existing pagan beliefs, trying Muslimize them, if you will, to make them. You see, we're you're part of the same tradition. They're taking everything and making a soup and claiming that they connect to everything and that they were first.
I find it very interesting that when Muhammad supposedly goes to up to the heavens and intercedes with God and tries him to negotiate the number of prayers down from 50 and gets it down to 5. It sounds very similar to Abraham interceding with God for the people of Sodom in the book of Genesis. And in both instances, even to the extent that in both instances they start with the number 50, which of course is totally impractical as any if you had to pray 50 times a day, and if you spend, say, 10 minutes on each set of prayers, you would never have any time for anything else. So it's completely artificial that anyone ever would have come out with the idea of praying 50 times a day. You simply wouldn't be able to farm. You wouldn't be able to do anything. But but in both instances, both with Muhammad interceding with God for the number of prayers, as with Abraham interceding for the number of righteous people who would be necessary to save Sodom, you start off with the number of 50, and then you decrease in blocks of 5 and 10. So it does look as though someone is just trying to fill out the story and looking for the Bible for something they could just take and change. It just looks blatant to my mind.
Yeah, this is sort of the conclusion I was pointing at, but just before I want to explain my theory about how this episode of the night journey connects with the Jerusalem thesis. What is the ancient connection between what is depicted, what is described in the verse, and Jerusalem? The first thing, when we take a critical look at this narrative, is to question the verse itself. What does it mean? Who is speaking in this verse? Who is saying glory to God? Is it God himself? Is it the preacher? And if the preacher is Muhammad, then why is Muhammad saying glory to God who sent his servant he sent me? There is something very odd here. Yeah. Who is the servant that is mentioned here? Yeah. And the answer is very easy. It's Moses.
Yeah.
Because
you know, I'd like to... Yeah. Sorry to interrupt you. I'm just thinking, for the audience, I hope all of this makes a great deal of sense to you. And you can see, I mean, clearly today's episode is going a little slower than usual. We're much more contemplative. We're really sort of working through this because clearly there's a lot to be taking on board here and to think about. But I mean, this is profound information, and hopefully you see it the same way that I do. But also, if you like what you're seeing, please go and talk to other channels, leave comments, right? I'm sure some of you are mods there. I'm sure some of you follow these channels. You leave comments. Bring up this data, because you can go in circles on interpreting what a word means or what the Greek word means or what the verse says. But the hard evidence, I mean, the clear borrowing, the plagiarism, the parallels, these are incontrovertible. These are easily proven historically. These can be proven in terms of events, dates, places, names. Talk about these things. Ask people to investigate these things. Ask other channels to, I mean, come and talk to us. We're happy to have them on. Right. And also, by the way, everyone who's on the channel today, all my guests, they're in the description. Please give their channel some love. Go see them. Go and subscribe. Give them a like as well. Right. And yeah. And of course, if you do like what you're seeing here, please do like, share, and subscribe to my channel. I just went over 30,000. Finally, it's taken a while. And yeah, if you do like what we do on the channel, you do appreciate it. Then please also do show us some love. Please support the channel, and for those who do, thank you. But what Odon is doing is profound. Please support him. What Quranic Endgame is doing is profound. And we hope to have Paul Ellis on to discuss his book in the future and get his perspective as well, and also debate these issues and discuss them. And this is really profound. Get others to talk about this, because you cannot escape this evidence. You can debate a word over and over and go in circles. Islam is peace. No, it's not. Yes, it is. No, it's not. Yes, it. But the archaeology is the archaeology. The events, the records, the data is the data. Thanks, Odon. Back to you.
Yeah, the answer to the question, who is the servant, is quite easy, because the rest of the surah is about Moses. And he is mentioned, I think, in the second verse, right after this one. So the first verse is all about Muhammad being the servant taken on a night journey. And the following verses are about Moses being the servant. And if you look in the Quran, Moses is supposed to have embarked on another journey, a journey from Egypt to the Promised Land. And I think it is referred as a journey, the same as the journey that is mentioned here, the journey by night. Besides, when you look at this this narrative, we are forced to make connections with the Judeo-Christian context, like Paul referred to, because in the Judeo-Christian, especially biblical or Jewish tradition, we find stories of various prophets ascending to heaven. Jacob, for example. We have many narratives in apocryphal texts which describe such prophets going to heaven. We have the same, like Lloyd pointed out, in the Persian culture. They are known for their flying beasts. So the one you displayed, Lloyd, but also flying horses, especially flying horses, like the ebony horse from the Arabian Nights. You see here a poster for the movie The Thief of Baghdad, which is an adaptation from the Arabian Nights with a flying horse. And there is also in the Zoroastrian religion stories about journey to the heavens. You told us about one. There is another one, a story about a priest from the 3rd century, Cartier, ascending to the heavens. But this is not the connection I found to Jerusalem, of course, because there is nothing here connecting these stories to Jerusalem. What I found is something else. In the Jewish tradition, there is a depiction of Moses' night journey ascending to heaven, where God showed him a celestial Torah. It is all derived from the text. In the text in Exodus, Moses ascends to Mount Sinai. So he goes into heaven, the place where God is. And there, God gives him the what do you call this? The tables of the law, the tablets of the law. So it's a sort of analogy for the Torah. And it's understood as such in the Jewish tradition. If you look in Targum Jonathan, Targum is an explanation within the Jewish tradition for the biblical text. So if you go to Targum Jonathan and you look the explanation for the verse 14 in chapter 19 of Exodus, the explanation here is God speaking and telling, you have seen what I did to the Misrei, so the Egyptians, how I bear you upon the clouds as upon eagle's wing from Pelusin, Egypt, to take you to the place of the sanctuary. So it is the place where God is. There to solemnize the Pascha, and in the same night brought you back to Pelusin, and from thence have you brought Unai to receive the doctrine of my law. So what we have here is a Jewish tradition about a night journey by Moses on being taken on an animal with wings from a distant place to a sanctuary, and then going back and receiving the holy word. And if you look at the Targum Jonathan in Aramaic, the sanctuary in question, it is named in Aramaic Beit Mokdasha, which is exactly the same expression as the Arabic Beit al-Maqdis, the sacred house. Sanctuary is the sacred house, it is Beit al-Maqdis. And it is used in Islamic tradition to refer to Jerusalem. So I think here we have the ancient connection with the Jerusalem thesis. In early Islam, this verse about the night journey was not about Muhammad, of course. It was just a proclamation that was made to teach an Arab audience about the traditions about Moses.
Can I jump in here
about Moses?
I want to show something. This is also taken from my stuff on monotheism. The idea of the Burak originally starts with Abraham. right? And actually, I believe it comes from a poem written by an Arab in the 800s. This is like 200 years after Muhammad dies, to explain how Abraham got to Mecca, back and forth to go play with Ishmael every day, right? So he got on this, the rocket horse or whatever. But notice Borak, they speak. So there's lots of the 5 creatures sit in 5 trees in the first white sphere: the lion, the Borak, the white falcon, the royal phoenix, the Duldul, who is the sign of godliness, sits on top of 5 trees. And Borak comes from the light of Muhammad, Duldul from the light of Ali, the lion from the light of whatever. On the 5 trees of paradise, you have to look at the Gospel of Thomas 19 and Manichaean literature. So they're borrowing imagery and ideas taken from Gnostic literature and other sources. So the trees of paradise are called the Tuba trees, the happiness trees. An eagle is perched on the tree of knowledge in paradise, according to the secret book of John, the Apocryphon of John. In Islamic tradition, the Borak is the winged horse, okay, and Duldul is Muhammad's white mule. But now, among other Arabic names for the star Sirius, or Alabur, the crosser of the galaxy, also known as Burakish, the one of many colors, because this thing has many colors wings. Remember, it's supposed to have peacock's wings with many, many colors. But then you have Jabal Loth, okay, Sanna, and you've got a place called Barakish, right, which is Darb al-Sabi, the Sabaeans, the people of the book, which are not people of the book, but are actually Gnostics and moon worshippers. But they, Barakish, and it says here, and their sanctuary was just like the Meccan Haram. These pagan moon worshippers, right? Then we go on. Then you go to the Jews, and you have Barak El, the Burak El, the horse of God, right? The Burak of God. The name is appropriate for the one whose appearance is like that of lightning, the lightning of God. The horse is so fast, it's like lightning. And you see it also in Enoch and in the Qumran book of Giants, another of these Gnostic Gospels. And of course, you can see this in Jewish law, in Manichaean cosmogony. Because at some point, remember I told you I want to start tying Manichaeism and its influence into Islam, because there's the book of Al-Chasai. And of course, the book was given by an angel to Al-Chasai. So Al-Chasai received a book from heaven given to him by an angel, believe it or not. And the angel was huge. And there's so many parallels with Islam, it's scary. So a lot of these things just seem to come straight out of Islam. Out of other cultures as well, along with what you're showing. So they've taken a mishmash of stuff, and a lot of it's Gnostic, a lot of it's Persian, a lot of it's Jewish. They've taken the terms and they've just tried to satisfy everybody by making a soup.
May I add something to Surah 17, verse 1? Probably all of you have known that I'm interested about this verse a lot. So just to try to enhance this even a little bit more. So Surah 17, verse 1 doesn't mention Muhammad, of course. It says servant, and the very next verse says, and we gave Moses the scripture, so it seems to be him. Now, the Christian Prince says this exact same thing. I have a video, I have extract from a video of his, the video is now gone, but anyone who is interested, they can go to my channel, look CP or Christian Prince Night Journey, and you will see it there. One of the parallels that he noticed is that the expression that says by night, it appears elsewhere in the Quran exactly the same, and it is Moses being basically taken by night. He says, there you go. So it's Moses in both instances. But it gets even more interesting when we look at the tafsirs. The tafsir writers, they notice this. And there is one particular tafsir writer who actually says, well, this is not Moses, because as you can see in Surah 17, verse 1, the servant is taken, and in the other verse in the Quran about Moses, it says that he goes. Basically, it used a different verb, but that happens a lot in the Quran. For example, the stories about Moses with the burning bush, there are 3 of them. The stories about Zechariah 3 times. So it's like they took from many different places. Something I've noticed from the tafsirs is when they actively, proactively trying to tell you this is certainly not that thing, is because there is something in there. So even the tafsir writers knew that people were going to join the dots. So it does look like when this was written, for anyone listening to those words, they knew it was about Moses.
Yeah. If I can say last thing before, I guess we'll wind down, but the issue of plagiarism by Islam is severe. And of course, Muslims will downplay what's in the tafsirs, what's in the sirah, what's in other sources. There's more than just those sources. But they either plagiarize Christianity and usurp these ideas and try to transform them for their own purposes, or they use them to insult Christianity. In a lot of cases, it's just insulting. Have a look at this. If you look at the hatred that Muslims have for Paul, right? If you go through the tafsirs, if you go through the Sirah, and you go through the historical books written by the Muslim scholars, and these were common stories, right? Of course, they've now forgotten these. They've picked one that they like, but there's dozens of these. There's no single one that has any particular weight. They just pick the one they like that's the least controversial, right? For now, at least. They might change a new one tomorrow, but Muslim historians and scholars have claimed that, and this is quite literally written in the Islamic records, that Paul was the king of the Jews because they confused Paul and King Saul. This is the literal truth. Christians, they explicitly claim, Muslim scholars explicitly claim, Christians followed Islam for 81 years after Jesus died. Because Jesus brought Islam and Christians were following Islam for 81 years after Jesus died. Paul was a wicked Jew, an evil Jew, and he committed suicide. He killed himself to destroy Christianity. True story. And then, of course, the Muslim scholars also tell us that Paul was a wonderful Christian, a good Christian, but he hated the Jews, and so he went to the Romans and he influenced the Romans to kill the Jews. Christians also never believed in Jesus' divinity. This was something Paul fabricated. Paul also invented the concept of the Trinity and inserted it into Christian belief. Not only that, Paul went to the Nestorians. Paul went to three different people. He went to the Nestorians, he went to the Jacobites, and he went to some other group. Now, the Jacobites are from like the 300s, the Nestorians are from the 500s, and the other group is from the 200s, but that's okay. That's okay. Don't worry about the time travel and these people all meeting Paul at the same time, 500 years out of date. No problem. Paul told these three different religious leaders from the three different churches, three different stories about Jesus, to cause deliberate confusion. So he told the one guy one thing, and then he sent them out to cause utter confusion. But he told the Nestorians this, and the Nestorians are from the 500s. That's great. Paul also caused the Crusades. And the Crusades were explicitly fought to hide Paul's lies, because the Christians needed to hide Paul's lies, and that's why they fought, because the Muslims were going to reveal the truth. And then a Muslim believer saved Christ's teaching. And they hid until Muhammad came, and then they revealed the written truth, which is Islam. This is the nonsense that these people teach. It is plagiarism. It is toxic. This is what they do. So the fact that you are showing, and Paul is talking about all of this craziness, all of this abuse of history, I mean, this is par for the course in Islam.
They're very creative when it comes to stories. They don't like anything as much as storytellers and stories. The thing with these studies is that we can sort of reverse engineer the stories and understand how they were created, how and why they were created, and we can understand what was actually early Islam about. What was at the beginning? There were Jewish stories, Jewish traditions, Jewish devotions to Jerusalem. They took Arabs with them, and thereafter the Arabs took over the Jews, and they invented stories to Arabize their movements, and they invented Islam as a way to explain that God had chosen them rather than the Jews and the Christians. But the thing is, their stories, even though they were very creative, they don't make sense. They are full of holes and incoherencies, inconsistencies, and so on. And by looking at them, we can reverse engineer the thing and expose that Jerusalem was the focus of early Islam. There was no Mecca, and so on.
Right. Yeah. So let's wind down, and we pick this up again next week. Yeah, I mean, so should we all give a last?
If I can just, obviously, we're saying good night, but I'd just like to place on record that I agree with a lot of the thrust of that, but to me that relates to the people who try to explain the Quran. I don't regard the Quran itself as being plagiarism. I think the Quran itself assumed that its audience were clever people who knew the Bible, knew the Talmud, knew the stories of Alexander the Great, knew all these things, and would pick up on its subtle and clever allusions. I think the Quran is a fascinating document, and if somebody had to ask me what my main question is, it is, what does the Quran actually mean? What was its intended meaning? It's the nonsense that's come after the Quran and after the death of Muhammad that has completely confused the landscape. So I totally agree with everything you said, Lloyd. Except I just want to place on record that I wouldn't say that the Quran itself is plagiarism. I think the Quran treats its audience as having more knowledge and intelligence than a lot of its audience has actually had in the preceding period.
Yeah, I would have a sort of nuanced approach between the one of Lloyd and yours, Paul, because the Quran tells us about it's not plagiarism, but it's a movement that was different from Orthodox Christianity, different from Rabbinic Judaism, but that borrowed some Christian beliefs and some Jewish beliefs, and it's something original. So it's not plagiarism.
I would agree with that. I would agree with that. Yes,
there was something that they wanted to go to Jerusalem to trigger the end times by having Jesus come back, Jesus the Messiah. So they couldn't have been rabbinic Jews or influenced by rabbinic Jews, but there is a Jewish way of thinking here. This idea that you can trigger the end times by hastening the coming of the Messiah is typically Jewish. But in the end, this early Islam movement was submerged by what Islam would become by the plagiarism here. That here we can talk about plagiarism. All these stories that were invented to give a new meaning to the Quran, a new interpretation, with Al-Buraq, for example, and the night journey of Muhammad, and Mecca being the holy city instead of Jerusalem, and changing everything, inventing history. But alas for Muslims, alas for Islam, it doesn't work like this. There are so many holes and inconsistencies and incoherencies and so on that it cannot stand.
Yeah,
I think Lloyd wants to go and have his dinner.
Yeah,
no, I prefer to sort of keep it around 2 hours. It's just tonight was also just a lot of information to take in, because I think this was the slowest we've really gone in depth on each of these points, and I mean, the parallels are stark. I mean, clearly it's a repurposing of an existing story. This is largely built on a Jewish foundation, clearly a Northern Levant foundation, and then of course you got all the other arbitrary garbage that comes later.
Yeah, it was a dance.
I'd like to actually say, Odon, well done. And I think it's been good that we've done this quite slowly today. So just focusing on pilgrimage and what it means, and that it is Jerusalem, how they plagiarize Safa and Marwa, and then the night journey. I hope that people watching, because we've only been talking about those 3 topics, they go away knowing full well, okay, they actually transferred all of this to make it Islamic. And I will second what Lloyd said earlier, which is people need to pick a fight with this. And we know that in academia it's not really happening. They will just try to ignore these topics, but hopefully you've been really impressed by seeing, yeah, fine, they copied that, they created Mecca. We need to get people to realize that these are the things that every single scholar with any common sense should actually be screaming from, shouting from the rooftops and saying, this is nonsense. Can we just call it a day? So we depend on people like you guys at home to make sure that these actually get at as far and wide as possible, because otherwise we're going to keep going around in circles for another 50 years when the information is already there.
We need courage and integrity, but we can start it at the grassroots level, I think. You know, we need to push hard we need to make our voices heard from this level. Yeah. So yeah, should we wind down here and pick it up again next week? I think this has been fantastic. It's really, I mean, I think it's obvious it's Jerusalem in this case. I mean, I think you've definitively sort of shown this is Jerusalem.
Okay. See you next week then.
Yeah, so thank you to the audience. Thank you. Please support the guests. Thank you for supporting the channel. Really appreciate it. Please talk about this. Use it on social media. And we'll see you guys soon. Good night and God bless.
Bye-bye.